It's cluster communications, because any operations, any non-direct I/O is going to go over that network. We can't just have some crossover cable, some low-speed network. Don't worry about the speed it says here, this 100 megabits. It's an arbitrary number Microsoft picked. They're probably going to increase it in the future. You just have to have a value. If you remember what we saw, it wasn't limited to 100 megabytes. We taxed this guy to 50%, so it was running at 500 megs a second. You need a dedicated physical NIC if you're using iSCSI for the Hyper-V servers to talk to the iSCSI storage. I want a separate management NIC for my Hyper-V server. I don't want to use the same one as the VM switch. Then I have another physical NIC which I just enabled for my Hyper-V machines. Now, what if you wanted to use iSCSI within your virtual machines? Well, then I should have a second iSCSI network physical card. I do not want a VM network switch enable this guy. This is critical to everything running. I don't want a possible problem with the VM switch to stop my physical box's access to iSCSI. So if I was going to enable iSCSI from my virtual machines, I would have a fifth network card for those to use iSCSI, and VM switch enable this, the fifth iSCSI instance. How do you actually control these guys? Which networks are used by clustering and which aren't? So let's just close that down now. So if I go to Failover Cluster Manager and look at networks, in my properties I define if it's allowable for cluster communication and if clients can connect through it. So this means that the cluster can use it for its internal communication, the network fault tolerant driver could bind to it. This means clients can actually connect through this adapter as well. This means cluster communications cannot use this network. So network fault tolerance driver could not bind to it. And you can actually see I did that on my iSCSI network. I did not want the cluster to use that, it's just for iSCSI communication. So I configured that not to be usable. For my public NIC, absolutely, cluster and clients can connect through it. If you wanted to dive down a little deeper, so this is 2008 R2 obviously because we have cluster shared volumes. What I can actually do in here is I can dump out the cluster information and format. I want the name, the metric, and if it's an auto metric or not. So you can see here that cluster internal, I actually gave a false metric. I set it to 500 because it's the metric with the lowest number that the cluster network fault tolerant driver will bind to. So in this case I want it to use this one above anything else, so I set it to 500. The others were automatically created. So for the iSCSI it gave a metric of 10,100. For public it gave a value of 10,000. Usually this automatic stuff should work. So if it's a public network, it's enabled for client communication, it will have a metric of 10,000 and then increment by 100 every adapter. If it's a network that is not enabled for client communications but is for cluster, it has a metric of 1,000 and then the second one increments by 100. Now this is an early beta and these metrics don't seem exactly to be calculated correctly. For example, that the public one is accurate and the iSCSI shouldn't be bound at all, but this guy also had a high metric, not 1,000 as it should have been, so I manually forced it to 500. If you want to actually play around and set the metrics, well, all you actually do is you just set a value. So NIC equals get cluster network, and then give it the name. So cluster internal. Actually, let's do cluster iSCSI. And then you just set the attribute. So I'm going to give it a metric of 20,000. I really don't want iSCSI to ever be used. And then if I dump the metrics out again, you'll now see the auto metric is false, and then now it's a metric of 20,000. So if for some reason cluster internal became unavailable, it would use public to bind to the network fault tolerant driver first. So that's really it. I really just wanted to make sure everyone's clear on what network adapters we should have in a cluster, and really understanding how that network traffic looks and what is this weird phantom network adapter you see. It's just the NetFT driver, the failover cluster fault tolerant driver. I hope that was useful. I get it gets confusing, but essentially that's all the cluster shared volume stuff does. Is where possible it does the direct I/O. Where direct I/O is not possible, such as SMB, all of that data actually gets sent over the fault tolerant driver to the node that has actually locally mounted that volume, and then does the write for it. I'll actually show you that really quickly actually. If I jump over to the node that does have the disk mounted and look at storage, you'll actually see that the LUN it's writing to, I actually have it locally mounted. On the other box, if I look at the storage, it's not actually, it's down. So when it's doing that direct write via the iSCSI we saw, when it was a copy within the virtual, that's all thanks to direct I/O that's part of clustered shared volumes. Okay, I appreciate your time and look forward to the next web seminar. Thank you.